Hi everyone, Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is July, and we are reading The Midsummer Bride by Katie Wilde. It's a reread for me. It was first time for you, right?
And for me, yeah, it was so fun.
It is
I
fun. I love her fantasy stuff.
mhm.
Um, Her worlds are very unique and like she brings them to life so well. And her characters um always hit me just right. Like it doesn't matter if it's fantasy or like her contemporary or
Yeah.
yeah, I just love them. But
I
so
will say
today,
that for fantasy, she does a really I think it's sometimes can be hard in any kind of fantasy world to dive right in
mhm,
and have you feel like you have your bearings, but she does a
right.
really good job of that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's how she manages to keep them like under 300 pages for a fantasy book is like unheard of. So, but today we'll be talking about the first 5 chapters, and we start with our heroine, Elina, who has fled her home after her sorcerer uncle had paid assassins to kill her.
Oh,
Um,
I do wanna sorry,
oh no,
I do
please.
this sometimes, but I wanted to tell anyone who's reading along with us, let us know in the comments or wherever what you think of these chapter headings. Like, there's not even, a chapter number, I had to keep counting, but
Same.
they're all, it tells you whose POV you're in, but also
Yeah.
it, keeps changing their name. Kind of.
Yeah.
Like Alina the Cursed, Warwick the Chained, Alina the Breathless, Warwick the Overturned, and it's so fun. But
It
anyway,
is really
sorry.
fun. I know. I really liked that too. But last night I was like, I'm like counting each one. I'm like, wait, where do I go to? Um, so yeah, so we have Alina. She's fled her home years ago when she was basically still a kid.
The baby.
Um, and her maid is making up her face in this traditional gold paint as she's about to go see this barbarian in jail. Hopefully he's the one from this prophecy that she's been told.
And
Um,
she's trying to stay super still because the paint is kind of cracking, and she
they like compare it to a mask. Like
she's
it's
very
almost like a it's like thick paint, almost like a mask on her face. And yeah, every time she moves,
mhm.
it's just like Um, yeah, and so she's hoping this guy is the one from the prophecy. They've met a few before who they were hoping it was and it wasn't. So this is kind of like a last shot deal. She needs him to help like remove her uncle from the throne before she dies of this like wasting illness that her uncle has cursed her with.
It's cursed with, yeah.
Um, and so her nursemaid, who's been her nursemaid since she was a baby, basically, gives her this like draft, which always makes her queasy, but it like helps keep up her energy and stuff with this whole disease she's got going on. And she's wearing
And
these
she
three, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
She's wearing these three enchanted jewels that were like randomly delivered to her. And
I
at
like
this
the
point it
crow.
doesn't say, yeah, at this point it doesn't say how, but it just says like delivered to her, and you're like, okay. And so they help her fight off the disease and also anything else that tries to kill her. Basically, it keeps anything from the outside from hurting her, but because the disease is inside, like it is still hurting her, but it's like slowing its progress.
So she's mentions that when she first got the rings, they were like, "Oh, I feel better, great." Um, but then there was some kind of assassination attempt, and the arrow just bounced right off her, and she was like, "Oh, this
Oh,
really, this is
yeah.
very helpful rings." Um, but now she is getting she's sick again,
Right.
and she talks about it's interesting because in as you're reading, she's not fully telling you how sick am I? I'm this
Right.
sick.
Yeah.
But she does say "Oh, I'm gonna have to put on this ceremonial clothes
Yeah.
and it's so heavy, I won't be strong enough to walk in it." So
Yeah.
she really is very ill,
Very sick. Yeah.
and she needs to she's going to a jail to find this
Yeah. Which of
barbarian,
course
as they
is going to
call him, a
be like
warrior.
terrible, which we see later. Um,
But it's because that's her last
yeah, like last ditch attempt to find this person. And so she's all up dressed up in the queen's garb. She really looks the part of the radiant queen of Aileron, which is her title technically. And then she puts on the crown, which is like a full-on headdress. It's not like a little tiara or whatever. And she's basically tired already just looking at it, and she hasn't even like tried to go anywhere yet. And so her sergeant at arms, Iarthil, tries to get her to reconsider, but she's set on this course. Like she knows this is the last chance. They're gonna have to figure something out if this is not the guy. Um, and
And she
he's
is like proposing marriage. So it's not like she's just saying like, "Hey, come with me." She's like,
right.
"We need to get married
Yeah.
to this stranger and
And
in a
so
jail."
the sergeant had sworn to her mother as she lay dying that he would protect Elina. And so he's been kind of a father figure to her
Hmm.
during all this time that they've been like uh out in the world.
She
Um
did have somebody who told her like, "Don't trust him. He's not." But that person was a traitor. So it was like
so she tries not to think about that, but it is always sort of in the back of
every
her
once in a
mind, and she
while.
doesn't know for sure. She trusts him more than anyone, but she doesn't fully trust anyone, basically. Um And so the witch's prophecy that she's trying to fulfill here says that Elina will know that he's the right warrior because he will fall in love with her at first sight. And so she's hoping that that's, something she's going to be able to recognize, obviously, like right away.
Yeah. The other thing
So,
that's interesting is that
yeah,
she's also like, "Oh, that means I'll be loved," which is it's such a sad thing for
it
somebody
is.
to like. She's like, "Before I die, someone will love me," and I'm like, "Oh
Yeah,
no."
it really is sad. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's almost like she's never been enough for anybody in her life. Like even all the people that stay and serve her, like they have other purposes for why they're doing it. Like they're protecting their families that are still back in Aileron, or in the sergeant's case, he was in love with her mother and he like vowed to her, and that's so it's more about her than it is about Elina. Um
Hmm.
so yeah, she has that problem a lot. So they go down to the cell, the beast, as the jailer calls him, his cell. Her sergeant asks him about the cargo he stole, which was actually slaves. And he asks, like, what day is it? Like, what was the moon last night, basically? And they tell him it was full. And he's like, oh, well, they're on their way back home then. Like he's been in jail for like a month. They've been questioning him every day. He's never admitted like where he took the cargo, they keep calling it, but it's like slaves. And
Yeah. I
where
guess we should say too that like in typical like corrupt jailhouse fashion, like the jailer, they have to bribe the jailer to get down there. He's very like, "Oh, well, I was very loyal to the whatever." Like
right.
but clearly he's not.
Yeah.
And when they
He's
get
loyal
down
to the
there,
coin.
the jail smells so bad that Alina's like, she already like from the beginning when she gets the draft, and when she's very
Hmm.
like, "Oh, my stomach is queasy," like her stomach's queasy like at baseline. So
Yeah.
when they go down there, she's like, "Oh no."
Like, oh, I'm gonna throw up.
Like,
Yeah, it's
and so
bad.
they're
So
doing
they
this
she
questioning and she's like breathing peppermint and she can't
Yeah,
speak to
she like
him.
has
They
a
don't speak.
handkerchief and peppermint, and it's like all she can do not to just like full on barf like in front of everybody,
Yeah,
which would
and they
be
don't
like
speak the
horrible.
same language either, so it's
Right, or it's
the
like different dialects or something. That's sort of ambiguous, I think. But yeah, it's like she's speaks northern tongue and his is eastern or something like that. But the sergeant speaks a bunch of different languages, so he's
Mhm.
translating. Um, and so he said, the guy in jail, the warrior, says that the people are already on their way home. Like that's what he had been waiting for, basically, which pleases her because she was like, if I find out he resold those people, like I'm just
Like,
gonna leave. Like I'm not even gonna like ask him anything. And so she finally gets up and she speaks to him the proposal, which she's required to speak. Her sergeant can't do it for her. Like that's their
it's a
part of
custom, and it's like the
yeah,
traditional like
their
thing
traditional
that she
thing. Yeah.
needs to do.
And so she notices that his eyes light up when he sees her. And she's like, oh, like maybe, like she's allowing herself to like maybe hope for the first time ever that this is
Yeah,
like really happening. But then we switch to Warwick's POV, our hero, and it's a
and
very different
he's like,
story in his
yeah,
head.
he's like, "Ew."
Yeah, he thinks she's an old woman because of this craggy face paint that she's wearing. And he also assumes that she stole the jewels from his realm 10 years ago which has cursed his kingdom. We don't know how at this point, but his kingdom has been cursed for 10 years. He's been on a hunt trying to find these jewels, and they've basically just fallen into his lap. So of course he's thrilled about that,
Yeah.
which is why he looks excited.
But
Um,
we did talk about this a little bit before we started recording, that she looks at him and like makes every good, like she definitely like leads with believing the best of him.
yeah,
And he is like the opposite, because he's like, she's old, she's greedy, she clearly stole these rings so that she could stay young and not die. And also, she's probably like
yeah,
every single thing. She's like, and now she wants this kingdom because she's also power hungry. Like everything bad, he immediately assumes about her.
yes, absolutely. And so of course he wants to kill her and take the rings back. But as long as she's wearing the rings, he can't kill her. So
She
she
has
has
to
to
give
trust
them to
him
him.
and like take them off. So he agrees to wed her in this like as a way to try to get these jewels back.
And he thinks that she's lewd too. Like she looked at him because he's huge.
Right.
Like we know this because we saw that part in her POV, and she was just
Right.
like, wow, this man's very large.
Yeah.
Um, but he's like, oh, she was looking me up and down, and I will use this to my in my like
Right. Absolutely.
advantage, to my advantage.
Um, and so then, so as soon as they've had the talk about where the fact that the people are on their way back home, and then he agrees to wed her, he literally just jerks his chain out of the wall and butts open the bars and like walks out. Like he could have left this entire time, but he stayed there to protect those people, and he couldn't leave until they were gone.
Yeah.
And so
He
it's
uses
very
like
funny.
some kind of mouse phone or something to like pick the lock.
Yeah.
It took zero
It's
time
hilarious.
for
It's a
him to get in
hilarious
there.
scene, and it's like clearly he could have left anytime he wanted, but he was like waiting. So the sergeant gives him a bunch of money and tells him to clean up, buy a horse, etc., and meet them at their camp.
Also, Elina by this point has already like kind of puked, because when they opened like
Yeah, it was not good. Yeah, poor thing. I felt terrible for her. And so he, in his mind, he's like, this is a lot of money. Like, clearly this is a test. Like, I could just leave and I would never like want for money again, basically. So Warwick goes and meets his friend Bannon, which they had planned, at this tavern. Bannon was his partner in rescuing these people, and he's been staying with them this entire time and saw them off that in the morning. But he notices that Bannon's fingers have started to turn gray, and it's the curse of the stolen gems. His people are turning to stone. That's what the curse is. Anybody who's from that realm, be they born before it happened or after, like eventually they all start to like turn to stone.
it starts in their extremities, and he explains that like they thought that they could get rid of it kind of like a gangrene or something, like
Right.
cut
Like,
off that extremity, it'll be, but it
mhm.
doesn't matter, it just keeps creeping up.
Yep.
So
And so he's horrified that this is happening to his friend. So he takes a few coins out of the purse, enough that he needs. He gives the rest to Bannon and tells him, head home to your sister and your nephew. Like, I have found the jewels and I'm going to bring them home. Like, go, just go. We're good, you know?
yeah,
Um,
it's
and
interesting that when they met, when they meet up, he was like, oh, I thought you'd be here like earlier in the day.
right.
And so it's clear that the assumption, or like we assume, that he was waiting when he asked like what with
Yeah.
the moon last whatever last night.
Yeah.
But like it's clear that he could have left at any moment because they had like an appointment
Right. A
to
plan to
be.
meet at a certain time. Yeah. It's that part was hilarious to me.
Hmm.
Um, and
Also the
so
bartender going like up, and then it's like he was gonna go kick
yeah.
him out, but then realized like,
Because
oh
he was like
no.
smelly. He'd been in that smelly jail. He had lice. Like he was a mess. And in fact, Bannon like gives him some shit for it. And he's like, God, you're ripe. Like, don't lift up your arm. Oh no. Like it was like
He's
really
like, we
funny.
should drink this ale outside so I can
Yeah,
get
so I
some fresh
can
air.
breathe. Yeah, it was really funny. So when Alina and her entourage get to the camp, Warwick is already there. He's bathing in the water, and she
Yeah.
decides to join him.
And she is where like it's interesting because Warwick was like, this is a test. But his friend says, like, because he, I guess he tells his friend that it wasn't Alina who gave him the money, it was
Right, the
her
sergeant.
like sergeant, her guard basically.
Yeah.
And he goes, did he want you to leave? Like, was he trying to get you to like take off?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I didn't think about that, because
Yeah.
apparently it was like a lot, like enough for
A
him to
lot.
buy his horse, buy boots, have money for a return trip home,
Yeah.
and still give Bannon like a whole bunch of money
Right.
that he could like do with as he pleased.
Yeah. So clearly so at first he thought it was a test, but then he's like, oh, maybe he was like playing both sides. Like he didn't really want me to show
Me to
up.
be here. Yeah.
So she decides to join him in the water. He's cutting his hair because he's got
Everybody's
ice.
very concerned about this.
Yeah. And she's like, it's fine.
Everyone's like, it's cold. There might be like critters in that water. Like,
Yeah.
you should go take a nap. And she's
Yeah.
just like, I was
She's like,
gonna take
no,
a
I'm
bath
fine.
in the
Yeah.
tent anyway. I'm going.
Yeah.
Um,
And so they're sort of talking more like looking at each other than talking because they don't speak the same language, obviously. Or she thinks that he can't understand her, but he can, which we learn in that first POV from him that, he understands the jailer just fine. He just didn't want to talk to him, so he hasn't been talking to him. So he misses a spot on his hair. So she takes the knife and is going to help him, and she gets dragged under by a mud beast, they call it. It's like a gator type thing, it seemed like.
it sounds like to me.
Um, yeah, so its teeth
And
aren't
she's
hurting
trying
her.
to like put like she's trying to make it let go
Yeah,
by like, but the skin is so like tough,
yeah.
and she has to like get it in the eye, like stab
Luckily,
it in
she
the
has the
eye.
knife in her hand. She had just taken it from him. So she stabs the thing in the eye and it dies, but it's still got its teeth wrapped around her leg. Now, the teeth aren't hurting her because of the rings, but she can drown because that's happening inside of her body. Um, and so, and also she can't swim. So even if she like managed to get the
Yeah,
thing
that
off
was
her
one of the
leg, like
arguments against taking that bath.
right, exactly. So Warwick saves her. He gets her back to her tent where they tend to her and she falls asleep. And Warwick is shook because he was completely wrong, which he now knows. He only dove down after her to get the jewels. Like in his head, he was like, oh, this is great. Like drowning. I never even thought about drowning. Like, and now I don't even have to do it myself. Like, this is awesome. Right. So
He
he
was
goes
like, it's a
down.
gift from the gods. I think he
Yeah.
waited until she was down there enough that he thought she might be like dead
Yeah.
already, and he just went down
And
to
so
get
he
those
goes
rings.
down there to get the jewels, but then he sees her actual face because now all the makeup is gone. She's not old. She would have been a kid when these jewels got stolen. Clearly, she didn't do it herself. Um, and so
He
he,
also says something that so was very striking to me. He says that her eyes, because when she was in the jail, he thought that she had like cataracts.
right.
And he said her eyes are not roomy like I thought. It's just that they're so light. They're like a silver color.
Hmm.
He's like, they're not the eyes of an old person, but they are. Like he
They
was like,
somebody who's been through
what
it.
was she had been through to have eyes like that?
Yeah.
And so he's absolutely like struck by her.
Well, and he just basically follows his first instinct, which is to like give her his breath, like she's about to drown. And he like puts his mouth on her, gives her his breath, and then brings her up. And so after she falls asleep, he talks to the sergeant about her curse, like when it started, how it works, all that kind of stuff. And so he tells Warwick about the raven who delivered the rings a couple years before
And she's
and
like, that raven is the familiar of the god. Oh,
of
what?
that goddess. Yeah,
So
that goddess that runs his realm or whatever. Like the raven is like her favored bird or whatever. And so he's like,
yeah.
this is all like she didn't steal these. Like this was all like ordained or whatever. And he can't believe that he almost let her die. Like he's like horrified with himself. So and he basically says to the sergeant, like, nobody's gonna get to my queen, basically. And he's like, your queen. And he's like, yeah, Elina is now my queen. Like like he's fully devoted to her,
I
like from
just
this
said
point.
it's
Um,
interesting because too, when they were in the jail, and he was kind of like, I mean, she could just hire somebody like if she wants someone to kill her uncle.
right.
And they had said, oh no, it's she wants someone to marry her because if she dies, it's still like if and he goes and kills the
Right.
uncle as her like late
As
husband,
her
that
consort.
would be fine. But if it was just some random man who did it, then that
Assassination.
wouldn't change.
Right.
It wouldn't change things. It wouldn't be like it would
Looked
be different
upon
as far
as
as
gay.
it was
Right.
looked. Yeah. So they at this point when he's like, oh no, I like, she is my queen now, I will be
Yeah.
taking care of her. um Her guard is still like, okay, just so you understand though, you're not going to become the king because the
Right.
line of succession is through the women.
The women. Yeah.
And so there's a distant cousin, because this uncle here killed
Killed everybody
every
already.
nearby female relative.
Yeah.
However, it's not going to be you. And then he's like,
Don't
that
care.
wasn't, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not the
Don't
point.
care. And also in his head, he's thinking about this curse because he feels like he tasted something when their mouths touched when he gave her his breath. And he's thinking that something else is going on.
Hmm.
So in the morning, she wakes up next to him and she's happy to see him. And he kisses her. And he wants to, but also it's partially to confirm his suspicions about what he thought he tasted when they last touched mouths. Um, and so later on, they're looking at this map with the sergeant, and Warwick suggests going through Galotha. I think that's what it's called.
Hmm.
Galoth, where they need to return, which is where the jewels came from. That's like where they need to return the jewels. And of course, he hasn't told anybody anything about that yet. But the sergeant doesn't translate what he says to her. He lies and says that that way is too dangerous. The stone sickness has made people mad, et cetera, et cetera. And so, of course, he's seething mad, but he can't say anything because he's still trying to keep this under wraps that
He
he can
doesn't
hand
necessarily
everybody.
want everyone to know that he understands what they're saying.
Right. And also he doesn't really understand why. Like, why is he lying? Like, what is his game, you know? Um, and so he offers for her to ride with him on his like giant he got like a giant horse because he's a giant man. And they named the horse Troll, which after this conversation that they have when she's on the horse and she says it like looks like a troll, and then he names the horse Troll. It's very cute.
Hmm.
And so she agrees happily. She like rides with him half a day before she has to go get back in the carriage because she's just like exhausted.
Yeah.
Um, and so then Warwick
And it's
asks,
like she lays down in the carriage. I don't know if you
right,
noticed that, but earlier when she was like, well, I mean, it's not that different from laying down in the carriage. And I was like, what? Like she only travels. It
like
made
in
me
bed,
think,
basically.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Warwick asks about this tonic that they keep giving her, and he tells Sergeant Irethyll about his people's custom that for 3 days after they wed, he's responsible for her all everything that she needs, he provides for her basically. So he needs to know how to make it. And she is like tickled by this
Ooh,
and
yeah.
also is like excited that he's interested in like bringing his customs into their wedding. And
Union. Yeah.
so she convinces the nanny Shar, as she calls her, to teach him, even though she like, is like a hoarder of this like apothecary chest and like doesn't let anybody touch it or do anything. She like does it all herself. And so she's not thrilled about it, but she, the queen tells her that's what she has to do.
What's she
So
gonna
she
do?
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that night he makes it for her the first time and brings it to her in the bath. And then they go to bed and they're like making out and he goes down on her, which is uh
Oh,
it's funny.
we need to mention that she was very clear, even from the jail, because he was like, is she a virgin? Because I'm going to sleep with this lady.
Right.
Even though he thought she was old and like, I think he was just trying to shock her, I
Yeah.
guess.
Uh-huh.
But he was like, I'm sleeping with her. And she was like, well, they were like, she is a virgin, but
Yeah.
she better be a virgin
And you
when
can't
you
get
have
married for
your
5
wedding
days because they're
ceremony.
waiting for Midsummer Day or whatever.
And so,
Um,
yeah, they have to wait for the midsummer, and she has to be a virgin when she gets there.
yeah.
And he's like, okay, but I'm still sleeping
Great,
in
fine.
her bed
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah.
Which interestingly, her nurse, like they have a separate tent for like her nurse and her maids and whatever, but
Yeah.
they weren't using it because they were all sleeping in her tent with her.
Yeah.
So this has like changed the
Changed.
dynamic a
Yeah.
lot.
For sure.
Because he's sleeping with her now. That
Yeah.
everyone now, the attendants are all in their own tent, and Elina is supposed to still be a virgin in 5 days,
Yeah.
but the very first chance he gets.
Yes. He goes down on her, and it's hilarious because she had just had a conversation with the nanny and the maid about barbarians and their like weird sexual customs and how was gonna kiss her everywhere, and how like what a like strange thing it was or whatever. And of course
Well, and like
afterwards
at
she's
the
like, actually,
first
that was pretty great.
and the first morning when she wakes up, they were like, "I don't know if you can handle all that." And
Yeah,
so, anyway, she
yeah,
she is like, "I can in fact handle it."
yeah,
It
and it
was
was awesome. Yeah, it was, so it's really funny. And so afterward, she's feeling safe because she doesn't think he can understand her. And so she starts telling him about fleeing her country and her travels and the prophecy, and how she can't ever really fully trust anybody, but how she's hoping that she can trust him
he
because
would
she's
be someone.
exhausted, and she wants so badly to trust him, but of course he hasn't been honest with her either, and you just know that ouchie is incoming. And
Yeah,
that's the end of chapter 5.
yeah.
So, because
I yeah, and at this point you're just like, "Oh no," because like that's gonna suck for her,
she
but
can
also,
trust him, but he's got to reveal some truths first, and they're not going to be. It's not going to go
well,
well.
and he's already gone like far enough into he's gotten far enough into it that any time is gonna be a bad time.
Yeah,
Like he should have done it yesterday, but now that he hasn't
yeah.
said anything, it's going to be harder and harder, and you know that like the longer he waits, the worse it's going to be.
The
So
worst it's going to be. Yeah.
uh
So I think the only thing he has going for him is, at this point, the only reason he's keeping it a secret still that he can understand is because he's trying to figure out who's trying to kill her, and hopefully that will be
well, and
in
because
his favor.
he's already had one instance where somebody like didn't translate what he was saying correctly or
Right.
didn't, and
Exactly. So things are getting interesting here, and we will be back next week with part 2. We'll see you
we'll
then
see you
over on
then.
YouTube.